And a very warm afternoon to everyone. Welcome to day one, track three of the event. And as our first speaker, we would like to welcome Shok Kronje. Hi, Shok. Shok is the VP of Platform Engineering at Jobel. He has an experience of over 4 decades in software industry, and he would be speaking on the topic quality governance starts with the platform team. To know more about him and to see his video interview, you can check the link given below. So now I will stop sharing the screen and Shok, over to you.
Thank you. Let me see if I can share my screen. That should be blank for the moment. Now, are you seeing my slide?
Yeah, it's visible.
Okay, good. Then we are good to go. And I'm glad to be back. It's the first time actually I'm speaking at GTR since COVID has hit. Because I looked at my slides and I realized I'd only spoken 2018 was the last time, and I think that was still a physical conference. So it was also good to see some names that pop up, and I actually had to scroll through all of the names who are actually attending. So I'm really glad people are here. So uh, I have been dealing with platform engineering for a while, and a lot of people are still not sure what it is. And I sort of wanted to bring the two things together because I think we have a very good way of being very effective in organizations. I just want to say some of these things that I do might be easier to do in startups than in big organizations, but you can do it in organizations, big organizations as well. It depends on the culture of the organization, but I'll leave that part to you to figure out because you will know your context. I'm going to give you my ideas and how I approach organizational effectiveness, and then you can decide if you can actually do this in your organization. If you can't, you might go to a different organization at some stage, or you might look at when you want to look at changing jobs, you might actually keep some of these things in mind and ask these kind of questions when to see if it's actually going to fit for you. So the first thing I want to actually say is platform engineering is not DevOps. Now, DevOps has been basically the big buzzword for a while. And I actually remember in 2018 or 2017 when I was speaking to GTR, somebody actually asked me this question: how is this different or just a buzzword, and how it's been changing? So to talk about DevOps first, that is really a contraction of development practices and operations practices. Bring the two closer together because we now have cloud, which has changed the way we are working, and it's a lot easier for people to spin up their own infrastructure in the cloud and basically deploy, and all those things have become easier, but it doesn't mean though if things become easier but you're be doing it sloppy. What has actually happened as the whole DevOps movement evolved, we discovered that certain things we are doing very well in DevOps, but we still have kind of silos. We still have, for a lot of cases, the testing team was separate, the development team is separate. All those things are really bad practices, and those kind of silos lead to ineffectiveness in organizations. But we've also found that certain things are starting to repeat themselves, and there are whilst we have teams that might now be doing their own operations, there are patterns that repeat themselves. And once you go beyond the single team with a couple of people and you really want to scale, you need to find something else. And these kind of patterns that have evolved actually well described. There are a couple of books on it now. What the best one to actually read is a book called Team Topologies, and I'll get back to that. But what we want to define and what platform engineering is today is taking one person's definition and says it's a discipline of designing and building tool chains and workflows, which will actually enable self-service capabilities for software engineering organizations. And this provides like an integrated product, mostly referred to as an internal developer platform. And this concept of IDP, actually, you can actually go and search and read upon more if you want. And I actually like that kind of concept. There's actually a site called, I think, internal developer platform.co or something like that. Although I don't agree with some of those kind of things that said there, in general, I do agree with the gist of that context. But basically what we want is we want to provide all the operational necessities of an entire life cycle of an application or multiple applications. Personally, for me, I use a different kind of approach to that. I tell people that platform engineering is about removing obstacles from engineering and business teams so they can focus on those things that will actually bring in money into the organization. So you might have feature teams, they build certain features, and those features are the things that generate the revenue. We want to make it as simple as possible for them. So that, to a great extent, that's what platform engineering does. You can look at it as a parallel. For instance, in the military, you have the so-called sappers or the army corps. Those are the groups in the military. They go out, they build bridges, they remove landmines, etc. They basically remove all those kind of obstacles so that other departments of the military can actually go and do their job, whatever it is. And to a great extent, that is what we can do with platform engineering. We also have this concept that is known as the paved path. And to a great extent, this is what we're going to do. The paved path is concepts that came out of organizations like Netflix and LinkedIn, etc. And it's about building things at a certain level, which makes it easier for other teams to build them on top of that. For instance, your organization might be doing a lot of JVM development, or you might be doing a lot of front-end development. There are certain things that become standard, and you don't want to put these things into every new project. Therefore, a team may come and actually build these standards for you, so you just go take that and you basically put it in your project, and you have your initial basis to build on. And this is, for instance, firstly, it could be infrastructure, and it's both your software delivery infrastructure, but also business IT. For instance, if your company would use Google Workspace, it's automation of all of that. You want to make it as simple as possible. You want to put your standards in place. That if you like onboard a new person, immediately the person is put into the right groups, has the appropriate permissions, etc. The second thing that you would want to do is, okay, we have all of these people that's now doing operations. We actually, our developers can go, they can go restart servers if they want. They can restart containers, and they can monitor queues, etc. Everything in the cloud. The problem is, it's great up to a point, but then you suddenly start hitting security concerns, you're hitting site reliability concerns, etc. And we are humans. When we are tired, we make mistakes. And some of us do not deal with pressure as good as other ones, and it's very easy to do something that is not the best thing when you are put under pressure. When somebody tells you it has to go out, this is important, people start cutting corners, which in the end just comes back to bite you. So one of the things that you actually build out is your role-based access control. So for instance, you could allow people to make changes in operations, but they cannot delete infrastructure, for instance. And that actually gives that team enough anonymity to actually do what they have to go do, but you still protect the organization. In the old days, we used to talk about the bastard operator from hell and things like that. And there were divisions between operations and like development, and you have to throw things over the wall. Well, some of you are still very familiar with concepts, but you might still be working in organizations where developers still throw things over the wall to quality people, which is a bad practice. And we also had this kind of things that once the product was built, it was thrown over the wall to the operations that had to deal with it. And you will see these reams of documents just to how to deal with things that are in production. Now, as we break down those walls, as development actually now can do these things, what we have more concern about is giving them enough permissions to do what they need to do, but not more. And that takes a lot of pressure off other people. So you actually basically reduce your whole operational space. But what we want to do is we want to have those things as kind of standards. So when somebody brings in a new project, they can go spin up infrastructure, but they will do it with roles that will give them enough, maybe a rights to spin up infrastructure and development environment. But when you spin up in production, you will give those roles can only be done by selected people who have those kind of permissions. And once it's up, the deployments will happen automatically, which brings you in with the development platform standards. So as I said, maybe you do a lot of Java development, maybe you do a lot of front-end development with JavaScript. There are certain standards you want. So we might actually define those down to which libraries are you going to use, which version, what kind of security now you're going to put in place, which is another thing we actually look in terms of quality governance is exactly security standards. For instance, if you're familiar at least, and I stick to Java and JavaScript because there's a very good chance a lot of people on this call are familiar at least with one of the two. You would know there's a lot of CVEs being produced every day. Some of them are not serious, some of them are really critical. You want to, for instance, ensure that you don't roll out products that have libraries in them that could be vulnerable. You also want to check that your current products that's out there are not vulnerable because they might actually contain specific libraries that are currently vulnerable. And so what you will actually build on is this kind of standards to have these things in place so that you have scans that run in your pipeline. You might have scans that run afterwards as well to check for things like that as they come to basically notify there's a problem so you can actually go and fix it. The same thing comes with testing standards. You might want to say, well, we are going to focus in the simplest cases. We want certain kinds of code coverage. We want to have you to be able to do not just unit testing. We don't want you to mock everything. We want you to run proper integration testing. You want to put all the initial standards in place so that when you create a project, when you want to roll it out to the first time to production, you have met it. This is not really new. But what we now say is we bring this in the platform team that actually define all of this and they roll it out to the teams. And those standards are there. And then we come to site reliability, which is all of the kind of things around observability, monitoring, etc. Because once you roll out the product, you have to monitor it. You might have to monitor CPU, you want to monitor latency, memory usage. You want to know when your applications, for instance, you have auto scaling in place, do they auto scale? When have they auto scale? Are they auto scaling too fast? So you have to have all those kind of things in place. But for a single team to do this, it is a lot of work. So if you have teams that actually build these things as standards and you just give them as the platform, and that becomes your internal developer platform, you actually gain a lot of effectiveness. And the other things, and actually this came from Maurits talk, I just picked it up. He says, I write documentation for a future me. And this is one of the things we want to do as well. And we have found it a lot of times is that you build something and then later you have to, it runs perfectly. As we are happy with it, you hardly have to come back to this. And then one day you need to make a change and you cannot remember. You have to go dig through things to find it. So if you do the purpose of actually generating documentation early, you can come back later one day to refer to it. But what we want is we want to make documentation as simple as possible. And with a lot of things like in the play path, we want to do things with effectively, we do infrastructure as code. We want to do documentation as code. We want to do testing as code. So everything is source controlled and you can basically go back. You can check the history on it because that's part of your security standards. You need to be able to audit things, but you also want to make your documentation generation as simple as possible. So you might use a markup language, maybe Markdown because it's ubiquitous, or you might be more sophisticated and actually using ASCII-Doc, for instance, to generate it. So people can just write ASCII-Doc as part of their code, and when the product is published, the documentation is published. And then finally, with all those kind of things of providing the pay path, this we want to get to this kind of concept as you built it, you run it, which is basically we want to be able to give that to the feature team, and they can effectively do things without talking to the ops team because everything is in place. And that's basically the concept of the PACE pathway, which is actually going to lie also as your foundation for your quality. But when we specifically go to look at quality, things do change. And yeah, I'm going to check how much time do I have. Because I think, according to the original session, I'm supposed to finish in about 3 minutes from now. Okay, but anyway, so when we get to things like we want to look at quality, so what we're going to do, we are going to focus a lot of automation. We're going to do quality first pipeline. So all of the pipelines we build, whether it's in GitLab, GitHub, or you use something else, you want to make sure that those pipelines don't just build the software. They have to build the software, do the security checks, check the code quality, check this, run all of the tests, make sure the code coverage is at the level that you expect. And if any of those things fail the build. You don't want to deploy when these things are not in place. And you might have heard a lot of people talk about like initially CI, and then they talk about CD, which is continuous deployment. These kind of things are the things that get you there. Now, your quality governance might actually also say that although we have these things in place, we are not going to automatically deploy to production. There are reasons for this because we humans make mistakes. So one thing you can do, you can have this whole pipeline complete. When your production deployment starts with that build, you can actually maybe still have a button that you, when everything is complete, you still click this button and say, now go and deploy it. I mean, some people won't do that, they just have the automated deployments go through. If this works for your context, that's great. For some people, that might just be better to have that final step to make sure, yes, we can now go. Because things have happened. Depends how you build your process. Some cases, we just work simply on a case. Once you move to a branch called release, or you tagged with a tag that starts with release, your release process starts. It's easy to accidentally do either. So sometimes it's great to have that additional step at the end where it's manual. I mean, you can automatically deploy to all of your development and staging environments, but maybe you don't want to do it for your production. It's up to you. But with these pipelines, you also actually need to bring in leadership. And the quality leadership is the kind of things that actually sits in your platform team. And it has to be things like, we want to scale out all of the benefits of good development and testing and DevOps initiatives to the team. And the best way of that is actually having leadership in your platform team. And one approach I've taken here is to tell the platform teams that everybody in this team should be able to do everything. But certain people will take the leadership on certain areas. So we might have a person or two people who might take the leadership on front-end development quality, and other ones might take the leadership on infrastructure quality, etc. They also work with other teams. They prevent other teams from basically in the organization from reinventing the wheel. You say, this is what we want to roll out, this is how you work. Maybe a team has special requirements, so they're not necessarily going to follow the standards that you want, they're going to deviate. But if they have to deviate, you want to be aware of it and you have to know the context. So your platform team basically also sets up the standardized testing frameworks. They could actually, for instance, build libraries that can help you with testing. If you do like a lot of testing with, say, AWS, and MySQL, etc., they could build you the basic infrastructure to spin up everything as containers locally so that you can do all of those tests locally. Even the AWS stuff, which you can, for instance, test with local stack, they can spin those things up. And then when it runs in CI, everything spins up as well. So your platform team's quality leadership comes from things like that. And then you have quality metrics, and you have to go look at certain things. What do I actually measure quality by? For instance, how many defects did I find in after a rollout to production? For me, that's still an important one because it tells me certain things about a team. It tells me a lot more about a team in that sense than what, for instance, code coverage would tell me. But for instance, I would like to have code coverage in there, like to say, well, I expect you have minimum 70 or 80% code coverage because that tells me another message. That tells me that you actually did the effort to try as cover as much of your code as possible. Obviously, it doesn't necessarily tell me the quality of your test, but that will, if your tests are not good quality, it will pick it up if there's issues in production. So your quality leadership comes from your platform team actually working with other teams and promoting these kind of things into them. And obviously, since the platform team generally will control the pipelines, they can actually make sure a lot of this governance is actually captured in automated processes. And once again, this is not the case of the platform team being some kind of operational teams that try to stand in everybody's way. They actually put certain things in the place to protect the organization, but they want to make things as effective as possible. And that basically brings me to the last point is we want to run effective organizations. So your platform team is something you should bring in as early as possible. Even if you're a small startup, you may say, oh, I have 5 people, doesn't matter. You should start scaling. We've run for organizations, we started a couple of people and we soon scale to like nearly 50 people in engineering from just a couple. If you do this too late, it gets more and more painful. And there's this concept we've been talking about for years, which is called build the walking skeleton, which is just a simple concept. Was if you're going to build a new product, you build the pipeline, you put the basic things in place first before you really build the product, which makes it a lot easier. So you put your infrastructure in place, you put your basic test automation in place, etc. And then you start writing your code in your test because now everything else is placed. It gets easier because everyone would know. If you don't do that, you get into pressure time. People are not going to write tests. They're just going to roll stuff out. They're going to take shortcuts on infrastructure and it's going to come back to bite them. I mean, you're going to get out like people just start checking in keys and secrets into source code to get things to work. And once that will come back to bite you. So you want to get these kind of platform things in as early as possible. And I suggest actually, if you're interested in this kind of topic, find a book called Team Topologies by Skelton and Pace. And it talks a lot about it. You can actually just search for it. There's a site, I think, also that's called teamtopologies.com or .org or something like that. Bring in quality expertise into the platform team because once you have that there, things actually, this is like a grassroots layer that you really build up because the platform team sits underneath all of the other teams. And you basically, from the roots up, you actually infiltrate the rest of the organization with the correct quality governance. This means there's a lot of automation that you have to bring in place, but you have to bring a lot of mindset, and your platform team actually working with other teams actually also work to change the mindset. So the platform team really need to understand soft skills and actually working with other engineering organizations because there's always a lot of pushback. People want to do things in a certain way, and they don't necessarily see the bigger picture. So this is kind of soft skills that you have to be able to work with other teams. And then you really want to get this point where there's fully shared operational responsibilities, as I mentioned before. You want basically your normal feature teams to be able to do as much to develop, test, and put things into production without too much hassle. So you want to remove those obstacles, but then once they're in operations, they have to monitor it and look after it. So you want to have that kind of platform in place so that they can get all the appropriate notifications, so they can make whatever needs to be updated in production, but without destroying infrastructure, etc.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Very sorry to barge in. As
Yeah.
for time, we have only 5 more minutes. Very sorry.
Okay, great. We actually have very good timing then. So the last point I'm going to make about all of this is you want to build your infrastructure as a service. You want to build the rest of the services. That's what your platform team is going to do. They are going to bring the quality in place, and they have to basically know that they have to take the leadership to infuse the rest of your engineering organization with quality. And with that, I am going to finish. So if you want to run with your 5 minutes of questions, then we're good.
Thank you so much, Scalc. So if there are any questions, guys, you can just unmute and ask. And otherwise, we can then move to the next session. Alankrit, would you like to show up the PPT and just thank Scalc formally?
I have few questions. If we can take up those.
Okay, do you want me to stop sharing?
No, we can have your presentation for a minute. So
Okay.
I'll not take much time. Here, the one question which I had is what would be the metrics through which we can actually measure the quality of release?
That is always a difficult question. I mean, people have written a lot about that. You have to decide. I'm going to say this upfront. You have to decide in your context what makes sense. For me, there is one big metric, and that is how many defects that you find after releasing production. Because that tells you how good your process was leading up to that. You can obviously monitor other things. You can monitor the performance of the system. You can monitor things like how many times do people go and reboot the system because it gets slow. You can keep track of things like that. And then you can have, obviously, using observability, you can automate some metrics. You can take things like the memory usage or the latency on the system, and you can actually feed that back. And then you can say, and you can put metrics, well, limits on that and say, if it goes above that, maybe we should actually now start looking at either fixing code or, scaling vertically or horizontal in the system, because that all makes part of your quality metrics. And the final thing is your security metrics as well. And they tend to be a bit more severe. They are things like how many things could we possibly be leaking? Are we leaking personal information? Are we vulnerable to attacks? If you're going to start running, maybe you get an external consultant in to start running penetration tests against your organization. Those things are sort of metrics you can collect, but they are not necessarily metrics you will collect every day. So in the end, for me, what's called the DRE, or defect removal efficiency, is the one that really counts for me.
Right, exactly. Leakage would be the main one. Thanks for answering my question. An insightful session.
Uh,
Right.
Thanks a lot, Shok, for your valuable time and an enriching session.